go live.
Ah, how do you do that?
Yeah,
Right,
just,
Charlotte does it.
If you just want to, we'll shortly go live. Just got to press the button.
You're live now.
There you go.
Right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scrutiny Committee for Children's Services, Education and Skills. At the moment, Sean Arnold is not present, but hopefully he will join us shortly.
Carl Love, just trying to get into the meeting.
And Carl Love, right. Anyway, we will continue. Apologies, absence. We don't have any official apologies, so everybody should be here. I have the minutes of the last meeting in front of me. Ah, yes, Councillor Andre is substituting for Councillor Fuller on this occasion. I have the minutes for the 23rd of July, which I'm about to sign unless anybody has anything to add or disagrees with.
No, move, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Right, any declarations of interest, please? Yeah, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I should declare that I am a governor for the Cornerstone Federation, which includes both Bay Schools and Knighton Primary. Thank you.
I think it's well known which councillors are governors at which schools, so I don't think we need to go through them all again. I think we take it as read.
Okay.
There were no questions, so the clerk has confirmed no questions. So first item on that we will come to is number 4, COVID-19 response and recovery.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll just kick us off, and then I'm going to invite colleagues to come in, and we've done a presentation which we couldn't share in advance, really, not least because it's absolutely live and up to the minute, if you see what I mean. So over the summer, we've been working hard on various aspects of response to COVID. We are in summary, in terms of children's social care, I would say we are extremely busy, busier than we were this time last summer. That's probably worth people noting. We'll dive into a bit of detail around that. We've made detailed preparations with schools for the return. As you know, schools returned early this week on the island. Most of those schools took inset days for the first couple of days, quite rightly in my view, to help teachers orientate and prepare themselves for a different teaching experience, and I think that's perfectly legitimate, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But we haven't got loads of data yet. I just caution you, because for that very reason we will have that as time goes on. And we've also been making preparations around homeschool transport, one of the trickier areas, not least because the government guidance only arrived on the 12th of August, which clearly is slightly tricky to get into negotiations with schools and colleges and so forth, when mostly they're on leave. However, we've put various things in place. That's still work in progress, as we expected, and it will be for a few days yet, I think. But broadly speaking, that's going okay. And there are other areas like early years which we'll cover as well. I think my view is that we've prepared diligently and we've prepared well, but the very nature of dealing with the crisis of this is that things will pop up and occur, and we'll need to respond, and we'll need to respond rapidly, and that's just the very nature of it. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. You deal with one problem and another one pops up over there. That will continue for a while, and we're perfectly prepared for that and content with that. But obviously, we try and minimise it as much as we can. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to I think it's Stuart's first on Stuart and Kathy are probably first on the presentation, and I'm going to invite them just to show the presentation if we can.
Kathy, could you share the presentation, please?
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was being done, so I shall just get that up. I'll just be 2 seconds.
So I'll start talking, and the first slide will come up in a second. So firstly, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. You'll remember from the last presentation that we took a sort of 3-phased approach to managing during lockdown and with the onset of the pandemic. And we always stayed in phase 1, which I'm pleased to say was business as usual, but doing it differently. And you'll remember that there were some real positives that came out of some of the virtual meetings and virtual visits, particularly with older children. And we've managed to retain some of that. And the reason I mentioned the 3-phased approach is because, as Steve said, if the situation changes, if we have a local lockdown, whatever, we feel we're well placed to be able to go back into I'll just wait while the slide comes up. So it'll be slide 2, please.
Sorry, it is getting. I'd closed down my email, so I'm just going to get that back up again.
Sorry, Kathy, it's Marie. I've just taken over with the presentation to share my screen.
Have you got it then? Because yeah, that's
Yes.
what I was told, that you guys would be sharing it. Okay, thank you.
Could you make it full screen, please, so that people can see it? Perfect, thank you. So those were the 3 phases, and I'll move on from that, but just to reassure members that we are confident that should we need to, we could go back to a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 approach. Hopefully that won't become necessary. Next slide, please. So as Steve said, what we've started to experience, and we started to experience this through June, and it's been sustained very unusually through August, is a significant increase in demand. So we've seen between a 15 and near a 20% at times increase in referrals coming into children's social care. Why is that? We think in part it's because actually some of those families have had the removal of other services during lockdown that they might have accessed. But also because actually there's been a lot of stress and strain on families just generally. So we are starting to see a real spike in demand. Our modelling, or perhaps I'd best say our analysis, is that's going to continue. We do not see there being a reduction in demand back to pre-COVID levels. We think this will be here for the duration, and by that I mean at least the next 12 months. History teaches us that when social care demand goes up, it doesn't go back down to previous levels, it tends to plateau at a higher level. And you can see the numbers on the screen there. The important thing is that you'll see, if you look at the assessments authorised and the timeliness of those assessments, that despite the increased demand, our performance at this stage remains exceptionally strong in those areas. And the bottom line, ICPCs, which are initial child protection conferences, you'll see there's been a significant increase in those, reflecting the increased demand and the increased complexity of the cases coming in to children's social care. Despite all of that, we are continuing to see children, and now we're seeing, as you can see on the bottom point there, we're seeing between 90 to 95% of our children and families face to face, obviously respecting social distancing insofar as that's possible. So increased demand, but we are managing to deliver a service and keep children safe. Next slide, please. Brian will talk much more about schools and the return of children to school, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that we have a responsibility in social care to make sure that vulnerable children are attending school. And Brian and I have worked closely together over the last few months, quite literally with thousands of names on spreadsheets to make sure that we know what's happening with our vulnerable children, and we will continue to do that over the coming months. In fact, the Department for Education are actually asking us for that information. How many children with a social worker are going back to school? So there'll be a lot of close working between the branches. Next slide, please. Again, this slide I haven't changed from when I showed it to you before. I just wanted to reiterate the strength of the partnership working around children's safeguarding. The police and children's social care have been working quite literally hand in glove. We've had good support from our health colleagues, and I think the island is in a really good place in terms of a joined up approach, not just looking back through lockdown, but as we move forward into what people, a phrase I'm not comfortable with, the new normal. I think it's just normal now that we're having to experience. Next slide, please. So what next for us? It's slightly small, this, apologies. I just want to reiterate that the demand is not going to go away for children's social care. We have got some additional resource, we've got a contingency plan, and we are responding to that. Longer term, we'll need to think about actually what are the longer term implications of sustained high rates of demand. We are making sure that children in our care are having face-to-face contact with their families. A lot of that has been done virtually, not all of it, but a lot of it has been done virtually. We're looking at returning some staff to office space and what that looks like and how we use that. My personal view is that we won't be going back to banks of desks in our office space. We'll have some desk space, but I think what social workers are saying is they want to meet up with their team and have that team discussion and feel part of it. And so perhaps we'll use our meeting rooms differently. We need to make sure that we respond to any of our foster carers or our staff that become that show signs of COVID, making sure they're getting tested and support them through self-isolation. And then finally, I think looking forward, a really good model, something we've learnt from the lockdown period, having what we describe as hybrid meetings. So some staff in the meeting room, perhaps parents and a chair and a social worker, but other partners coming in through Teams, much like we're doing now. We think that's a really good model to make sure that we have good attendance as well as keep people safe moving forward. And I think that's my next slide, please. Yes, Chairman, I don't know whether you want me to take any questions now or to wait till the end.
No, I think if we take them now, because I know from my own experience, you sometimes forget an important question and then kick yourself afterwards. Is there anybody on the committee who has a question for Stuart? Yes, Councillor Andre. Unmute your mic.
Finally, sorry, it just wouldn't let me unmute. Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. I have to admit, I think those figures are actually very impressive and I'm very encouraged by those. I'm also very encouraged by the fact that not only have we reacted to the current situation, but also you mentioned about future sustainability, which is obviously, you know, equally important and also something that needs to be carefully monitored. Not the least in terms of staff, because as we know, this period has been very stressful. It's been a very stressful period for staff. One of the questions I have, though, and I think I need to ask, is 90 to 95% face-to-face, and the amount of assessments, the high level of assessments that have been done. What's actually being done to monitor those assessments and those meetings that haven't taken place to make sure that they don't fall through the gaps?
Well, Councillor Roger, Stuart will come in. They do take place. The 91% is within a certain timeline. So the others take place, but they're outside the timeline. That's all. So absolutely 100% of them take place. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My question was on similar lines, and part of it's been answered. Is that 90 to 95%, which is very, very good. It's a very good presentation anyway. Thank you. My question is, would that be sustainable? Is that could we? Will you let us know if anything, if it drops from that percentage, or how will we know? And how can you guarantee us that that will be kept at that level?
Well, I never guarantee anything in my business. I've learned over the years, things change so quickly. What I would say is, in terms of face-to-face visits, before COVID, all visits were face-to-face. We weren't actually, the regulations did not allow us to do virtual visits. The regulations have been flexed, understandably, so we will maintain around 90 to 95% because we think that's what's in the best interest of those children. There is some flex. So, for example, if we have a child, and we do have a child placed in Scotland, that would be one where you wouldn't always necessarily want to do a face-to-face, for example. In terms of assessments and our ability to do those in a timely way, the performance of the island children's services has been strong for a long time. That's not new. We've always been around 90% of our assessments have been done in 45 days. And where they're not done in 45 days and they run over, that's the other sort of 5%, sometimes 6 or 7%. They're only over by a day or two, and there are usually particular reasons for that. So I think the committee can feel reassured that the performance has been strong and continues to be strong.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right. Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Stuart, for your presentation. Just a quick question as usual. With the resources coming in, are you expecting increased demand, and how have you taken on extra social workers, and how are they coping with demand? Thank you.
That's a very pertinent question. In terms of how our social workers are coping with the demand, well, it's not just the social workers, it's the team managers, it's the whole service. I think it would be fair to say they've been absolutely fantastic throughout the last 5 or 6 months. At times, some of the individuals get tired because, of course, they are constantly on their hybrids. They are going out and seeing families, but they've been working relentlessly for a long time. And we've been encouraging staff to take leave. We've been looking at their well-being to support them as they make the changes to the way that we're working. So I think that the social workers and managers are coping really exceptionally well. In terms of additional resource, we'd already agreed, we had one eye on this happening. We expected there to be a rise in demand, and we kept some agency social workers within the service, even though normally we would have said thank you very much, but we don't need you any longer. And we're looking longer term at what other additional resource we might need. But we have had the full support, I have to say, of the Chief Executive in terms of if we need to look for additional resource, then that will be available. The caveat there, of course, is it's not easy to recruit experienced social workers. I don't want to detract from that at all. It's a national issue, and the island is no different in terms of facing that challenge. But we're doing our best in terms of recruitment.
Thank you. Could I just ask a very quick one, Chairman, about you having your permanent social workers and the importance of building a relationship with the clients?
Yeah, I mean, the rate of agency social workers on the island is one of the lowest in the southeast region. We do have some agency social workers. Obviously, we want permanent social workers, but actually, I think it would be fair to say for some social workers now, being an agency social worker is a lifestyle choice. Right. They often take long periods of time off in the summer. This summer was an exception, but we often will lose agency social workers around May and June whilst they go off travelling, for example. So we're always going to have a balance. What we try to do is keep them with us as long as we can, so there's consistency for the children.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Mr. Ashley. And I must say, I think the committee would like to forward their appreciation of all the hard work, because I have met 1 or 2 social workers across the summer, and I've said once before, they found it quite shattering. I just hope and pray none of them have burnt themselves out, because this sometimes is what can happen. But I think our committee would like to express their thanks for all the hard work. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
If there are no more questions, we'll go on to the next part of the presentation, please.
Yeah, so the next slides are from Brian, and they're going to describe where we are with schools. So over to.
Yeah, could the slides be put back up? Thank you, Ray. My slides continued after Stuart, so I think you'll have to flip through the one Stuart had just gone through. That's it, thank you. So the last time we updated the Policy and Scrutiny Committee was right at the end of term, if you remember, and I was very ably assisted from Lisa from Haylands, who exemplified what it was like to be in a school over the lockdown period. So since that committee, right at the end of July, school staff have obviously had to work hard over the summer to implement the guidance that's been produced by the DFE, which is obviously based upon the public health science. They've had a real focus in line with the guidance on making sure that they've got the hygiene advice right in school, so students having access to wash their hands very regularly, making sure they're sneezing and coughing into their elbows, all the usual messages we've had drummed into us for the last 6 months. Creating separate bubbles, and we spoke about that last time, creating one-way systems to try and stop children bumping into each other to spread the virus. They've had staggered starts, finishes, breaks, lunch times. They've also spent a lot of time crafting the initial few lessons. So yes, really focusing on well-being, checking the children are fine when they've been returning to school. Through questioning, through the activities they've been presenting to children, assessing where they are in their current learning, but also, and I think it's really important, getting back to normal learning, normalisation of the education system, because children need that kind of routine and getting back to where we were. What I would say, Councillor Churchman, is it's been very similar to the normal pattern of opening at the start of the autumn term. So as Steve said, quite often people have an inset day or 2 inset days at the start. Usually in secondary schools, they have year 7 back in a day before they have the other children in. And all the patterns of behaviours that we see in the start of a normal term, we've seen on the island over the first couple of days. So term started on Tuesday, exactly the same as normal. I can also report, and it's flimsy data at the moment, because obviously not all schools are back. Some started today, and I haven't seen the data from today yet. But if I go through 1 or 2 schools just to exemplify why we've got high patterns of attendance. So these are direct quotes from emails from head teachers. 9 acres, we're fully staffed, all but 5 children in, normal reasons for absence, not particularly COVID related. Honey Hill Primary, all the staff have returned, all but 1 pupil are in. Binstead, the term started well, good attendance, hooray, it's lovely to see the children. Nettleston and Newchurch, 1 head teacher, all but 1 family back there. Holy Cross, all but 1 child back in. Bembridge, everything's fine, all the staff in, only 1 child's off through illness, there's another 1 shielding. Secondaries went back largely today, so Cows had year 7 and year 12 in. They've got 100% attendance in those year groups today. Ryde, we're expecting 271 children in their year 7, and they've actually had 270 in year 7. They've had 271 turn up, so they've got a higher percentage than 100%. So just to give you a flavour, it appears that we've got pretty high attendance and people have wanted to get their children back into school, which in my view I think is a good thing. What I will have is over the next couple of weeks, obviously we'll then have a couple of weeks data which will give us a more accurate assessment. It's a bit anecdotal at the moment. Next slide, please. I don't want to get into the politics of this isn't, that's not my place to do that, but you'll know there's well documented last minute changes to the graded system, moving away from an algorithm to one based more on teacher assessments. You'd expect a children's services department to focus on the children and the young people, so that's exactly what we've done rather than the politics. And I have to say, education leaders have as well on the island. So our careers service was available for students and parents to seek guidance from on the examination results day and since then. So lots of advice has been available for students and their parents. And schools and colleges have really focused on the next phase of education and making sure that the students in year 11 were able to access their post-16 education, and the students in year 13 were able to access post-18 university education. What I would say is those pathways on the island have been secure. When I talk to secondary head teachers, they are telling me that actually the children have got the placements in the colleges that they wanted to, or their places in the sixth form. The Isle of Wight College guaranteed all the students a place that had applied, and similarly the school sixth form, they bent over backwards to try and make sure that the children could progress to the next stage of their qualifications. In terms of universities, again, universities reached down brilliantly for the island students. We had very few cases of students not being accepted into their first choice universities, and actually where they didn't get the grade to the first choice university, the few that hadn't been accepted were still able to get into their second choice and were perfectly happy with that. On results day we had, and a few days after, we had a handful of students that hadn't got places, and we've been chasing those up, and by and large those people are now been placed in universities and are moving on to the next phase. There's something the government does called the September Guarantee, which is making sure that students post-16 have got recognised places in education and training. Always on the island, we have very low figures of children not in education, employment or training. We've always had a fantastic record on that. Lower percentages than the South East England average, lower percentages than the English average as well, and I'm expecting that to remain the same, but we need a few more weeks to go through those figures. Next and final slide from me, I think. So looking forward, what's next is we are in daily contact with public health, analysing any new cases, making sure that we're prepared and that schools have got the advice as to what to do when there is a case. We're in regular contact with all school leaders. I know the school improvement team will have had a conversation with every single head teacher before tomorrow, so everybody will have been contacted in the first week and had conversations. We are standing up services and getting back out to schools. So for pupils with special educational needs that need specialist advice from our specialist teachers, those services will be going back out to schools to give the children what they need. The school improvement team, whilst doing some things virtually, just can't look at the quality of children's work and the quality of teaching virtually, so they will be going out into schools as well, and some of those visits are taking place next week, and we've got a risk assessment around that. And it talks to the school's risk assessments. You'll be aware that the government has made money available for catch-up strategies, and it's early days on that, and people are doing the thinking on that, but we are promoting very much evidence-based strategies, and there's some great work that's been undertaken by the Education Endowment Foundation on the strategies that actually work with catch-up, and those are the strategies that we're promoting with the schools to make sure everything's evidence-based. The other bit we're doing is preparing schools, and it's the piece of work we'll be doing over the next few weeks, to switch to remote learning if and when, and it's probably more when than if, we have a local case in a school. So if we have a positive case identified in a school, then you have to take action. That bubble of students is likely, the public health advice is likely to be that they will have to self-isolate for a fortnight. We can't leave those children without work, and therefore we're making sure that we're ready to switch to remote learning if and when a bubble goes home. So for primary, there are kind of 3 levels of planning for primary. We have what we call a long-term plan, which ensures the whole of the national curriculum is covered. We then have medium-term plans, which are typically half a term long, which outline what objectives are going to be covered in each half term. And then finally, what you have is very assessment-led short-term planning, which is almost done on a daily basis. Today, my kids got this. Tomorrow, I need to adjust the learning to take them on to the next phase of their learning. It's very difficult to put the short-term planning to a remote style of learning within 24 hours. So what we've designed as a school improvement service, and we've done this for all primary schools on the island, is we've produced the lessons that they'll have available for the first 48 hours. And they're taken from the objectives, and we will produce new packs on a monthly basis based upon the objectives within the national curriculum. So schools will have age appropriate resources for the first 2 days if there is a local lockdown, and then they'll be able to go to a more assessment-led system. With secondary, we haven't, it's more difficult. GCSEs, it's very much about covering the content and it's less assessment-led, and therefore we're working with secondary heads and issuing guidance to secondary heads as to how to deal with remote learning. But again, all based on good evidence-based approaches. If there is a bubble that has to go home, the DfE has announced a new scheme around laptops, and we're making sure that the DfE has got the contact details for every single school, and if a school has a partial lockdown with a bubble sent home, they can apply for laptops for any children that haven't got one, and the DfE are guaranteeing that they will get those laptops to those students within 2 days. So that's another system that's put in place, and we're making sure we're prepared for that eventuality. And then finally, right at the end of term, the government announced a small pot of money for the Isle of Wight. It's about £23,500, and they are producing some content around well-being and mental health, and each school will have to have a mental health lead, and they will be invited to attend 2 twilights between now and the end of October. I'm told that there is content in a PowerPoint that the DfE are currently working up with experts in the field, which we should have access to in the next week or so. But our job will be to make sure we are organising those twilight sessions over the next month and a half. They will be rolled out by our school improvement team, the educational psychology team, health colleagues, particularly colleagues from CAMS, and public health as well. So there'll be a kind of multi-agency rollout of that to make sure we're also signposting to the very good resources that already exist around wellbeing and mental health. So a good start is what I'd say, but obviously there's much more planning to do over the next phase as and when cases occur and we have to go into some sort of partial sending home of children. Thank you.
I must say, Brian, that's so comprehensive. We're not going to lose you up to central government, are you? Because your planning seems to have been superb. I almost got lost halfway through with the amount of data that you have talked about. I must say, I'm very impressed. However, do any of my fellow committee members...
If I can answer that question, Vanessa, I would much rather work for yourself and Paul and Isle of Wight councillors than anybody centrally, so I'm definitely not going national.
Right, do any of my fellow committee members have any questions for Brian? I personally can't think of anything that he hasn't covered, but maybe Councillor Andre?
Sorry, I'm having a few problems with my mute and unmute button. Yes, I haven't got very much to add, except that, Brian, you touched on building on the resources that already exist. And as I know you're well aware, the Youth Trust have produced an excellent schools mental health charter that some of the schools have already signed up to. So that I would like to think that that's one of the tools that's already in the box that we can be building on.
Yeah, there's lots of tools,
Yeah.
Debbie. When we come to produce the PowerPoints to do the Twilights, we'll have a big list of those. The other bit I'm keen to do is the Isle of Wight have secured funding for 2 mental health teams as well, which will be rolled out across the island as well. And we need this to talk to that initiative as well, because the 23,000 is short-term funding from between now and March, so it'll kickstart some things, but we need to mainstream it after that so those initiatives can carry on.
Do we have anybody else who has any questions? No. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for that very comprehensive report.
Thank you.
And we just, when I say keep our fingers crossed between now and Christmas, that's all we can do.
Thank you.
So,
Right.
Chair, we've now got Suzanne Smith is the next person who can pick up the narrative from here and talk a bit about homeschool transport and early years in particular, but 1 or 2 other things as well, I suspect. So, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thank you, and hello to you all. I've not been to one of these meetings before, so I'm Suzanne Smith, one of the 3 Assistant Directors of Children's Services. So I will talk through, like Steve says, just about the homeschool transport side of things and early years. Starting with homeschool transport, it's been a huge organisational feat really to get transport arranged, and that's for a number of reasons. As Steve said, the guidance came out quite late in the day. We have had obviously a new contract for school buses on the island that was due to be implemented at this time of year, prior to COVID, but we've had changes as a result of that. And we've also had requirements placed on us from the government to support the public transport system by ensuring that we are suppressing demand on that system. So that's opened up a whole new cohort of children whom we wouldn't have to normally organise transport for, but who we have to take account of in our planning for September. We've got differing sets of guidance. So on public transport, for example, you've got limited capacity because social distancing still applies. The rules are different for home to school transport, where there is no social distancing. And just things like that have meant that we've had to think really long and hard at the individual school level around the arrangements that we've put in place. So what you now hopefully can see is a kind of summary of what is in place. We've got a number of mainstream buses and SEN buses arranged, organised, good to go. We have a number, we have 160 children who've been given bus passes to use the public network, and we've done the modelling on that to ensure that the social distancing can still be maintained. And where necessary, we have put additional buses in, or we have changed public service routes into scholar routes temporarily, which is something that we've been given permission to do in our September return planning. We've got 100 taxi arrangements in place going to Isle of Wight College, to special schools, and there are a very small number of arrangements for individual children that we are still finalising that are around taxi routes. The families of SEN young people were offered a parental mileage allowance in place of and that's basically a payment for them to transport their own children to school, and we have 53 families who've taken up that offer. And that offer is available for the autumn term, but it's also available on a permanent basis for those families who are eligible. Like I say, we work really closely with Southern Vectis around where we use the public transport network, but also where we might need some dedicated transport. And one of the things I haven't covered here, but that we have in the background, is additional capacity that is available to us to put on at very, very short notice. One of the unknowns here is the demands of the public transport system. So across all of our arrangements, we have buses available that we can get going within 24 hours to manage any capacity demands. So in terms of homeschool transport, we are largely ready. We know we will need to flex and adapt. And we think that next week will be quite busy for us in terms of ensuring that we do flex and respond to the transport system. Beyond that, we will have to see how things go. We're very much waiting to see what does happen around public transport, and it's only recently that the Department for Transport and the Department for Education have have linked up and started to look at the system as a whole, and we're working closely with them on that. The only other thing I'd mention is we have been given some government grants to fund the additional transport we've had to lay on, and so we're monitoring those costs very closely, and we'll make a submission to DfE in due course to recover those costs. So that's the kind of summary on home to school transport. If I move on to early years, similar to the school system during lockdown, we obviously had very few children attending, and we were monitoring attendance of key worker and vulnerable children very closely. Over the summer, we have had children attending childcare. The Isle of Wight has a higher proportion of term time only childcare places, so we would expect quite a number to be closed. But we're not aware of any sufficiency issues over the summer. So all children who wanted to access childcare, as far as we are aware, have been able to access it. We made contact details available to help parents who were unable to find childcare and broker those arrangements, and we didn't receive any inquiries over the summer period for support in that way. We've been able to confirm to early years settings what their funding position will look like going forward. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the funding model for early years looks at previous attendance. So there's a lot of nervousness in the sector about the impact of COVID on their future funding, but we've been able to firm that up to early years settings. In the last month, we've had around 300 children a week attending childcare, and about 50% of our settings open. We anticipate 100% of settings being open from Monday. And we don't have any particular concerns at this moment in time around early years, albeit that we think that the financial consequences to the early years sector in the medium and longer term need some very careful monitoring, and we're looking very closely at how we can build support, learning, facilitate contact between different settings to help them with their business planning and their sustainability over the coming months and years. So that finishes my presentation. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me?
Right, committee, is there anybody who has anything they would like to ask Suzanne, please? Councillor Brading.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to say a huge thank you really to Suzanne, Martin Goff, and to Mike Griffin-Thorne. The challenge of putting the new contract in place and the new provision in place at a time of COVID, when people are nervous about going back to school anyway, has been an extra challenge. I've done 2 interviews today to try and put some of the myths to bed around, you know, Southern Vectors were the only bidder. No, they weren't. It was a very comprehensive procurement process that the Isle of Wight Council went through. We did have quite a few bidders for the contract. I'm pleased Southern Vectors got it, because obviously they are an Isle of Wight company and they do understand the logistics of the Isle of Wight. I describe it as a 3-stage process. Stage 1 was our statutory bus contract. We then worked with Southern Vectors very hard around their commercial scholar service that they've put on to pick up, for example, they've picked up West Wight to Cowes Enterprise College. No statutory requirement on us, because West Wight catchment schools are Carisbrooke and Christ the Kings, but to recognise that there's a bus needed from West Wight to Cowes Enterprise College. That's been arranged. And then stage 3 of it was filling in the gaps that we knew existed. I'll give you 2 examples. There was a corridor out in the corridor out in the centre of the island through Whitwell, Chow and Knighton, mostly go to Christ the King due to the logistics of the old catchment areas. You know, we put on 3 minibuses to pick up all the children through that corridor, and even our Elverston Garden Village. There was children there that wanted transport to Sandown Bay Academy, which we were doing by way of a taxi. Even yesterday morning, we had a phone call from a well-known island person. How am I going to get my child to school? They start tomorrow. Yeah, it was 8:45 yesterday morning. It was sorted by lunchtime. So all the stories in the press about, you know, the council slashes this, and we have procured a real flexible service. Officers have worked incredibly hard to get where we are. We're still addressing issues now. There's one cropped up literally an hour ago when this meeting started. I had an email from the county press. I emailed Martin Goff, got an answer back within 20 minutes. And I just phoned Lucy Morgan and given her the update to the story. So officers have really been tight on this one. We have now got a service fit for purpose. Yes, there's a saving to the Isle of Wight Council, of course there is, because the demographics on the island have changed. with the free school and less pupils now requiring free transport. Sandham Bay Academy is now more popular than it was, thankfully, and that's helping. But, you know, thank you to the officers for all the incredible work. Yes, there's more to do over the next week or so till it settles down. But Suzanne, thank you to you and your team for the brilliant job we've done to get where we are.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brading. It's nice to realise that, Suzanne, I'm sure that you really are appreciated. Thank you. Are there any questions from the rest of the committee, or can we move on? No, right, okay. If we move on, have you finished now, Steve, or is there anything else to come from you on COVID?
No, thank you. I'm done with COVID. I wish that were the case in reality, but you know, I'm done for today on COVID, and it's the next item on the agenda. But I think.
Right. Thank you very much. Right, we now go to the Adult and Community Education, the Ofsted Inspection Report. I presume that the committee have read the report. Rob, would you like to speak to the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just give you a bit of a overview of the Community Learning Service for those that aren't aware? So the Adult Community Learning Service provides and commissions adult community learning opportunities right across the Isle of Wight. The funding we receive is through a grant from the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and we are expected to implement a government policy called New Challenges, New Chances. This is a strategy that was written in 2012, so we are anticipating a new white paper, possibly by Christmas, which will have new priorities for us to consider. So the purpose of community learning is to help people of different ages and backgrounds to acquire a new skill, to reconnect with learning, encouraging health and social well-being by pursuing an interest or preparing to progress to further education or employment. Also, there are elements of our learning offer that help parents and children learn together. Most of our provision is accredited or non-accredited up to level 2 equivalent, so up to the equivalent of GCSE. Generally, courses that can lead to education or further employment are fully funded and there's no charge to the participant. But for those that are purely for self-interest or for well-being purposes, we do have to charge a fee, but we put a concession in place for those that are on means tested benefit to be able to access those services more affordably. We work in partnership with a network of organisations across the island, about 60 organisations that have some kind of interest in lifelong learning for adults. We work quite closely with the National Careers Service, which is based in the job centres, and with other local further education providers. So we kind of focus on 5 key areas. First is adult skills, which is mostly around employability and basic skills qualifications in English and maths. And that is one area that we've prioritised keeping going during the COVID lockdown. Like schools, we had to do tutor assessment, just a tutor assessed grading for those qualifications, and we managed to get 75% of those that were enrolled in September to achieve their qualification at the end of this year. Digital skills is the second area we focus on, which includes very basic digital skills up to through to qualifications at level 2 in the European computer driving license. So again, essentially, digital skills has become a bigger priority during lockdown, and our centre is reopening in Ryde next week, and one of our priorities is to get people the very basic digital skills quickly in order that they can go online and continue their studies if we have to have another lockdown. Third area that we focus on is related to family learning, and it's working with parents to help them equip them with some skills to support their children at home, and this includes some parenting support and communication skills, with a focus on family resilience. The fourth area, we call it health and social well-being. So this is kind of the traditional view of what adult education might be. Your evening classes that are fun, creative stimulation, that you're doing it for personal interest. but we often find that that is a good hook, a good first steps for people back into adult education, and then they might want to pursue their basic skills or return to college or doing an apprenticeship at a later date. And then the final area that's quite important to us is we commission some of our funding to mostly voluntary sector organisations across the island, mostly working with sort of bespoke disadvantaged groups and providing specialist provision that we wouldn't necessarily have the staff resources to provide. So currently we're working with 7 organisations starting this month. Correless is doing some digital inclusion programs with older adults. Nature Therapy is doing some mental wellbeing programs using drumming. Boston Equine Assisted Learning Centre uses horses in a therapeutic manner, particularly with people with mental health difficulties or behavioural problems. Vectis Radio, many of you are probably aware of their 4Ps program they've run with young adults. We're now being able to pilot that with some older adults with disabilities or learning difficulties, so we're very pleased with that. The Crosley Company, they provide our parenting and family learning programs. The New Carnival Company do outdoor celebratory arts events, and we're also doing a program with Pan Together based at the Isabel Centre, looking at cooking on a budget for families during this autumn. So yeah, turning to the committee report, paper B. It seems a lifetime ago now, but we were inspected at the end of January, and we were very pleased that we were awarded a grade 2 good, and very pleased at the key strengths that had been identified. So there was 3 key areas that were identified for improvement. One was around shorter courses that the inspectors felt that the measures put in place to monitor how far people had travelled, how much they had achieved, wasn't sufficient. This kind of links into the government priorities as well for this funding. So for those short courses, they're mostly sort of art and craft activities that people doing for their own enjoyment. So the government is pushing us to for people to self-fund those courses rather than to use a government subsidy for those places. So we've put in place measures so that we can from September, we've increased the fees so that they can be self-funding, but we've also maintained a concession available for people on means-tested benefits, and also people that are in contact with mental health services can also qualify for a greatly reduced access to those courses, because we appreciate the well-being benefits of that group activity. Another important area for us to develop was our impartial careers advice. So we have traditionally worked with the National Careers Service, but they had reduced capacity over the last couple of years to provide an impartial careers advisor for the service. So from September, we have employed a very well qualified careers advisor that works with other providers as well across the island, and will provide a range of employability courses, one-to-one careers advice, and a clear remit to be impartial. She's not going to be just promoting our courses, because we only provide courses up to level 2, so there's a very important range of progression opportunities that she'll be promoting. And then the final major improvement was around monitoring of safeguarding incidents. So the Ofsted inspectors felt that we had accurately recorded and responded to safeguarding incidents as they had arisen, but we hadn't documented the follow-up arrangements to that. So we hadn't sort of checked on, we hadn't recorded how we had checked on welfare, or how we had checked on agency referrals 2 weeks, 4 weeks later, to find out that to kind of satisfy ourselves that the incident had been resolved. So all of the improvements that were suggested by Ofsted were incorporated into a quality improvement plan, which is a normal tool we use in an annual cycle anyway. So the lockdown period has enabled us to get well ahead of these improvements, and to be quite well assured that we're confident those are fixed now, ready for September start.
Right, thank you, Rob, and congratulations on receiving a good from Ofsted. Obviously, it's taken a lot of hard work and dedication. Right, committee members, do you have questions, please? Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rob. It's brilliant and good news to have the positive outcome from Ofsted. My question is, the last recommendation, you should record and monitor safeguarding incidents up to the point of resolution. Surely that's something that should have been in place in the first place. We have to, as far as safeguarding is concerned, we have to complete that circle at all times. And I just wonder why this recommendation has been made. Is there anything we missed, and why was it missed before?
As far as we're concerned, we were documenting and recording the incidents up to the point of resolution. In many cases, it might be pastoral support, and in some cases, it may be referral to the appropriate safeguarding teams and agencies. So in some cases, once we've made that referral, we're not necessarily entitled to know too much detail about the next steps. But what Ofsted were wanting to know, particularly in the pastoral cases, is that we had followed up, the tutors or the service had followed up with the person who had a concern to check on their well-being and welfare at sort of a two-week or 4-week interval. Yeah, so it's kind of the lower level of the safeguarding, the ones that hadn't been escalated. They wanted us to. We had emails to show that we had done it, but we hadn't documented it on our safeguarding referral forms that we had checked in with people about welfare, making sure their situation had improved, or whether they'd followed the information and guidance and signposting links that we might have provided.
Right. So it's merely the exercise, the paper exercise. Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Right. I have a question. Services, how has COVID affected the provision of services? Before it obviously was at a certain level. How are you coping now post-COVID?
So we have probably achieved only 50% of the target learner numbers that we would expect in a normal year. But we prioritise those basic skills qualifications, basically. So the maths and English. So we set up WhatsApp groups, we set up distance learning, have contacted people through virtual learning environments, via telephone support and via post where necessary as well. What we did find was around 25% of people had competing priorities at home with homeschooling or work, and also some people struggled with access to digital devices or good internet connections. So for example, some families were just using a mobile phone in their 4G contract, and they quickly ran out of credit for their internet use, which made it hard for them to regularly participate. So we were pleased that at the end of the year that we had managed to get 75% of those learners achieving their qualifications. In an ordinary year, we'd expect that to be nearer 85%. So there is obviously some into our Westridge Centre over at Ryde from next week. Obviously put in the similar arrangements as schools in terms of social distancing, smaller class sizes, staggering start times, lots of extra cleaning regimes, etc. So we're expecting a lot of learners to return and hoping to recruit some new ones as well. Some of our subcontractors were really affected by the lockdown as well. Some courses had to completely stop. So our art and crafts courses completely stopped as well, for example. But many of them have managed to embrace video technology. But this has led to them working on a one-to-one basis with people a lot more. Obviously, a lot more cost involved than group activity, but for those that have been most vulnerable in our learners, we've managed to prioritise keeping them going with some kind of activity, even if it's not at its normal level.
Thank you, Rob. Any other questions from anybody? Sorry? Oh, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, Rob, I'd like to go back just to the safeguarding issue. Safeguarding is a hat that I seem to wear rather a lot, and I am actually Safeguarding Link Governor. Now, I know certainly in terms of the school, you mentioned the school, the improvement plan as being part of the self-evaluation. And I know that Ofsted look to see that safeguarding is embedded in that. Now, certainly in a school setting, you would expect everyone to take safeguarding as their responsibility and for there to be very clear and robust procedures in place. Now, the fact I'm sure that there are, but the fact that it wasn't documented. So how can you reassure us that everyone knows what those procedures are in terms of if they have a safeguarding concern, who they report it to? And also, as part of that process, do you have a lessons learned and perhaps how we could tweak the policy to do it better next time?
Okay, so from a learner's perspective, we have a learner handbook. So every learner gets a handbook that talks about procedures, that has a learner charter in it and is very clear on safeguarding arrangements and who designated safeguarding leads are. From a staffing perspective, we have a tutor handbook, which again has all the policies involved. It has all the safeguarding procedures spelled out, and the emergency and out of hours contacts where a member of staff, such as myself, is not available to walk them through the process. Tutors have an annual induction for years. Around September, we're going through tutor induction processes before they start delivery, and online safeguarding refreshment training is incorporated into part of that, as well as reviewing the policies. Then we have a safeguarding referral form. So at the point of incident, it's kind of a brief one-side A4 document to help the tutor record what has happened, what is fact and what's opinion, and what further steps they need. So that might be that they can make the safeguarding referrals directly themselves, depending on what the incident is. But in the case of where it's in pastoral concern, they would normally contact one of the designated safeguarding leads to talk through an issue, and it's normally resolved through providing information, advice and guidance. So what Ofsted wanted us to do was we'd recorded those steps, and what had been taken immediately within the week of a safeguarding concern or a pastoral concern. What they wanted to see was documented what we had done about it at a later date, how we'd followed it through, how we'd reassured ourselves that the incident was closed as far as the impact we could have on it. So that's
sorry, do go ahead.
So that's the improvement that we've made, is this for the recording form to formally have space to record a 2-week and a 4-week follow-up. It was happening informally. Well, it was happening, and we had email evidence of it. But in the safeguarding packs that we gave to Ofsted, they felt they didn't know necessarily that the signposting, for example, that we would have put in place had achieved the result.
Okay, and if I can just have a follow-up. I mean, what we would do as governors of the school is we would actually look at who has overview of that and what the data actually tells us. So, for example, if you've got a particular staff member that hasn't made any referrals, is there a particular reason for that? Have there not been any incidents, or do they not have the confidence? So presumably it's the DSL that would have oversight of that, because it should be an ongoing process. So who does the DSL report to?
DSL reports to the head of service for learning and development.
Okay, So there is oversight of it.
Yes.
But you see my point that you really have to sort of sometimes dig a bit deeper into data to make sure that not only do you have that policy, but that policy is actually being enacted.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, tutors are always emphasised with tutors that DSL are always at the end of the phone. So if you have a doubt about whether it's serious enough to be a concern, or then seek advice. Don't just let it slide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Are there any other questions? If not, we'll move on. Thank you, Rob, for your report, and well done with your good inspection report.
Thank you.
We now move on to the adoption service. Steve, who will be presenting this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's I think it's going to be Debbie. I'm just making sure she's appeared on the list of blobs at the bottom. I think Debbie Price is going to give an overview of both adoption and fostering in due course. That's the next item on the agenda. Stuart may want to come in and just lead it off. I'm not quite sure. I can see his microphone unmuted. So I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So Debbie will pull out the key points from the reports. What I would say to the committee is, I think, and I hope that having read it, you've found the evidence that both have made significant progress in terms of the changes that have been made, and positive progress in terms of the modernisation of the service. I won't say any more than that, but I just wanted to make that point, and I'll be quiet now and let Debbie take you through the key points. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. I guess I should start by introducing myself. I'm Debbie Price. I'm the newish. I've been with us a year now, service manager for children in care. That includes children in care, care leavers, Bewley House, fostering and adoption. So that's me. If I take you through the report, obviously you've seen both of the reports. So I'll just take you through the key points, as Stuart said. So since the period started in April 2019, we started to work with Adopt South, and they have taken over some of the key parts of adoption work. So they've taken over the marketing activity, inquiries, etc., and some of the support of adopters. That's been very successful for the island, and we haven't required any placements outside of the Regional Adoption Agency this year. There is some good performance throughout the report, which I'm sure you've noted. I'll draw your attention in particular to point 3, complaints, point 9, that there have been no disruptions, point 12, that performance is good in terms of timescales, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail. And also that life story work is strong, and later life letters. So if we look at the adoption scorecard, which is at point 12, there are 3 scorecards that we need to report on nationally, and there were 9 children adopted this year. The period between them entering care and moving in with their adoptive family was 395 days. That is within the government threshold of 426. Slightly up on the period last year, but that will be about the needs of individual children. Obviously, they're very small numbers. Scorecard 2, for those 9 children, the average time between placement order and a match was 225 days. That is due, which exceeds the government threshold, but that was a real positive for those children because we did find permanent families for them, and obviously that is the most important thing. That compares to 100 days in the same period last year. And 8 of the 9 children in scorecard 3 waited less than 14 months between entering care and moving in with an adoptive family. That compares to 6 out of 7 for last year. So in terms of our scorecards, it's pretty good news. As I say, with scorecard 2, you have to take into account that we place some quite complex children with permanent families, which is very positive. And as I've already said, we had no disruptions in this year, which is also really good news. So in terms of the other areas that I need to draw your attention to, it's really just that there has been a slight increase, 11 referrals in terms of access to birth records. Instead of previously it was just 5. That too is fairly positive. That's in point 14. Obviously that means that people know who to contact in order to access their birth records if they wish to do so. So that's a good news story too. We've also made 15 applications at point 14 to the Adoption Support Fund. All 15 were successful. That compares to 36 applications last year. But what we did, because we were able to work with Adopt South, they were able to provide some training in-house that ordinarily would have been commissioned. So that would have required an application to the support fund that we didn't need to make this year because we were able to provide that in-house. So my last point really is about family finding. During the last year, at the end of this year, we were family finding for 3 children, and we were left in the report. There was a child that was 2 years, 7 months, and a sibling group. You'll be pleased to know that we have found links for all of those children. That will, of course, for the child that's 2 years and 7 months, there will have been a longer period of time than we would expect. So next year that will show on our scorecard. But we are incredibly pleased that we've been able to find him a family, and that is such good news for him, and something that we were beginning to wonder whether that would be possible. So that really good work with Adopt South to find a family for him, and we're hoping that he will move in October. So that's very positive. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I don't know if you've got questions that you would like to ask.
Right, thank you for that, Debbie. I did go through it, and I'm absolutely hopeless. I want to burst into tears every time I think of a child who hasn't got a home. I find it. Oh, anyway. Rest of my committee, please. Questions? Right. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I should declare an interest here because I did sit on the adoption panel, but I have to say, since it went over to Adopt South, I don't think there's been many Medina panels that have actually been held, so I haven't sat on one. Yes, I'd just like to say, in terms of the Family Finder service, now that we're sort of more established, well, we are established as being part of Adopt South, and I know there were a few teething problems, which I have to say Adopt South, I think, were very, very, very keen to iron out with us. Do you think that's facilitated, because obviously that has given us a sort of greater pool to actually family find, and one of the things that I know with the team is they are so child-centred, and that came up very much, that was very evident in your report, that it's not all about the government targets, and I find that really reassuring, and I know through being involved with the process that there are children that are not going to sort of fit within those targets, and it's much more important about having the right families, and you evidence that by the fact that there's been no disruptions, and that's the absolute ideal that we're working to. So it's really, so in terms of Adopt South, would you say that it really has benefited us, and that we are now starting to reap the benefits of that?
Absolutely. I think it's fantastic for the island. It really gives us the opportunity to work with people that know the adopters as they're coming through. Our social workers absolutely know our children. They really do champion our children to make sure that they get the right matches. It is a really, really good thing for the island. It means that from the very beginning, as children are coming through, the social work teams, they attend the legal planning meetings from the beginning. They know children as they're coming through. They're meeting with their colleagues in Adopt South all the way through the process, and they are identifying those children that will be more difficult to find families for really early on. They are working together to make sure that the matches are good ones, and I've been really impressed with the work that's happened through the last year. It really is going well for us.
Thank you, that's really good to hear.
I think I remember quite clearly the meeting last year when this programme, for want of a better word, was put forward with the emphasis on good marketing. And it looks, Debbie, as though what you said last year has actually come to a very successful fruition, which is sometimes the ideals are there, but they don't always come through. But it's certainly in this, it has achieved what you had hoped. You didn't say it would, but I know the strategy that you outlined did sound the right course.
Yeah, I think it really has worked, and I think that marketing for Adopt South on the island is more tricky because obviously the Isle of Wight Council, the Isle of Wight is known, Adopt South isn't the island, but I think that they are doing really good work. They're doing adverts on Isle of Wight radio now, so people really are beginning to understand what Adopt South is. That new branding takes a little bit of time, but it's coming through. But from our children's point of view, this has worked from really early on. We've been able to get matches from the beginning, and that's what we needed.
I have a couple of questions. What do you see the challenges will be in the coming year? Because obviously we're going to have a possibly poor economy and maybe a fair bit of unemployment. So I know I'm not asking you to look in a crystal ball, but it is going to make your life, I think, more difficult.
I don't think so far it's made very much difference, and that's really positive. I think people are reevaluating their lives. They're looking at what's important to them, and quite often family is really shining through, and that's really positive for us. We're all aware of that, and we're trying our best to make the most of that without going too far, if you get my drift. So it's a tricky time, isn't it? And it's tricky to know how things are going to work out in the future, but certainly Adopt South and us are really working together to make sure that we're aware of the climate as it's changing and that we're moving with the times. And for us and Adopt South, we've been keen to look at virtual panels as soon as it was possible to do so that we didn't lose any traction on assessments and approvals, and that's been really key. We've looked really carefully at how we do introductions. Introductions have gone ahead safely. Children have moved safely to their new families because children couldn't afford to wait. So we are able to move through challenging times. I think it has been challenging, and I think we're getting better at it as time goes on. So I'm optimistic.
If I can come in on that one, Chair.
Steve.
I think it's a really interesting time, and both for adoption and for fostering. There's something about there's the potential for an opportunity here in that people, as Debbie rightly says, are reevaluating their life balances and so forth. About work and staying at home, and that may bring the opportunity to have children into their life, whether through fostering and adoption. The little word of caution I've got to put in is that, as you rightly said, Chair, actually, these are emotional issues, and when you look at they are life-changing, quite literally life-changing things. But they change lives for children, but they also change lives for adults. and we need to be really sure that people coming forward are coming forward and understanding the permanency of the changes they make. They can't, once you've gone into this, you can't change your mind. So that is going to take a bit longer for that to play out, and for us to really be sure that people who may have had some thinking about this have really thought it through and what it means. So it'll be a while yet before it plays through the system, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, I think that the silver lining to COVID is that people have really had a good look at their lives and realised that it isn't all about materialism. We actually all need one another. And the nicest thing is actually to be able to talk to other people and do good things. So hopefully that will come through too. Right, Debbie, if nobody else has anything to say, we can move on. And thank you very much for the report, and we'll all hope that this time next year it will be still a story that's moving on and getting better. Now, as she looks for her agenda, right, we're now on to the fostering report. Who will be doing the fostering, Steve, please?
It's Debbie.
I'll just give a quick overview if I can, Chairman, and then I'll hand over to Debbie.
Yes.
It's the Debbie show this evening for us.
Fine.
Again, I make exactly the same point. There's been some significant improvements in terms of the fostering service on the island, and we know that having a good, strong pool of foster carers to call upon is essential, both in terms of offering the right quality placements for children, but also in terms of managing what resources we do have. And again, I think the report shows evidence of those improvements, as well as having one eye on the future to take things even further. So, Debbie, over to you again, please.
Yes, what I would say about the fostering report is we're not in quite the same place in fostering as we are in adoption on the island, but we need to work towards that. So this report is the same. It goes from 2019, and at the end of March 2020, there were 85 fostering households on the island. We have a marketing strategy for 2021 with a target to recruit 15 fostering households. In terms of marketing, we need to increase our visibility across the island, and we've obviously got a marketing programme which was somewhat changed as a result of COVID, because a lot of it was face to face, and obviously that has needed to change going forward. But for last year, a lot of the marketing was face to face, and it had some. We got a lot of inquiries last year, not many conversions, and I guess that's the thing to draw to your attention. Recruitment was lower than we would have expected, but what we could see is retention is good. And what we did last year was a lot of building towards the future. So I came into post in August. It was already considered at that point that we weren't creating the traction that we needed to in order to convert more assessments through to actual foster carers. And as you can see in 3.5, the conversion rate from inquiry to approval was 2.5%. Now that's much lower than you would expect. We had 79 inquiries, but we actually only had two approvals for last year, which was really poor. And that's something that we needed to work on improving. In terms of the feedback from foster carers, that in itself showed really a lack of engagement. So if you look at we did a survey last year, and what we found was that there were very few foster carers that even responded to that survey. So only 22 foster carers, 23% responded. So that in itself probably shows us that foster carers weren't that engaged with the service. But those that did talk to us talked about their concern about support, the length of assessment, finances, and work with the children's social workers. And we've already done a lot throughout the year to look at improving that. So that report came to us in August last year, and since then we've done a number of things to improve matters. So we have restructured the service, which we worked on last year, and the service was restructured in April this year for both adoption and fostering, but there were more changes in fostering. So what we had a number of social workers that were doing both assessments and supporting foster carers. That has now changed, and social workers concentrate on one or the other so that they can really give foster carers the time that they need, either in assessment or in support. And we are already seeing that is making a real difference. We've approved 6 foster carers this year already, instead of the 2 that we approved in the whole of last year. So in terms of what they suggested we should do, what we're working on is improving our reputation across the island. So we're looking at making sure that we are doing good work with our foster carers and really making sure that people know the work that we're doing, so that we improve our reputation both within our own foster carer group, that we engage with our foster carers more, because we know that that was an issue, and that we improve our marketing. So we are beginning, as I said, to see those results. We are in the period of COVID, we saw an increase in responses to surveys, etc. So whilst the recruitment wasn't as positive as it might have been, what we can see is that actually retention is very good. We lost very few foster carers last year. Only 12 were deregistered, and 6 of these households were connected carers. All of the people that left us were for reasons that you would expect. The other issue that I want to draw your attention to is just that we've had 27 concerns and complaints. There were no cases presented to the IRM last year. Is there anything else you need me to cover within that report?
Right, committee, do we have any questions? Councillor Cameron?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Debbie. I just wonder, with this, you mentioned the lack of communication. It's almost like there's a gap between the foster carers and the authority. Do we still have the foster carers training sessions? It used to be called the foster carers lunch. And because when I was children's champion, they used to work very well. And
we do. We continue to have those virtually, and what I would say is this is last year's report, and what I think has happened is we've moved a long way since August last year, when the foster carer feedback came through, to where we are now. And I'm really pleased to say that the feedback that we're getting now is very, very different. We've held out of hours support line through COVID, so that foster carers have been able to contact support workers out of hours since March. That's only recently stopped, and we're expecting that we'd start it again if we need to. People just stopped ringing it because they were getting so much good support during the day. So I think the relationship between us and our foster carers has really developed during the last year, and that isn't always easy, because obviously this report runs right from April last year through to March this year. I think next year that there will be a very different report, which is really positive.
That is good. That's good to hear. Thanks. Thank you.
Stuart, did you raise your hand? Did you wish to say anything?
If I did, my apologies. I certainly didn't mean to, Chairman, but no, I've got nothing to add. Debbie's, I think, answered things very well.
Right, okay. Has anybody else on, Councillor Andre?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for that, and it's good to see that that you are aware of the areas that need driving. Just one thing, you mentioned about the recruitment, and I've seen the breakdown of the various types of fostering placement. How do you monitor? Does that sort of feed into your recruitment strategy? Because obviously you've only got 4 according to the chart at the moment, although I appreciate last year's figures, 4 supported lodgings. So for example, would you incorporate that into your sort of recruitment campaign if there was a particular type of lodging that you needed?
One of the things that we have noticed this year is that is an area that we really need to focus on. So we've actually created a post that's going to focus on supported lodgings. So that's something that we're really able to drive forwards, because we do know that is an issue that, well, we need more carers for those children that need something that's more independent but aren't yet able to live on their own, and that is a real area that we need to develop. So yes, we have given somebody that specific role. We're recruiting to it now. It's a temporary position in order to start to drive that forwards. So yeah.
But also that goes hand in hand with promoting the support, because it's not necessarily that the support isn't there, but from the figures it looks that people aren't necessarily accessing that support. So I think that goes sort of hand in hand, doesn't it, with saying, the support is there and you will be supported as part of that sort of recruitment.
I think the way of working virtually has really helped our foster carers. I think they enjoy being in touch with people frequently. That's much more able to, it's much easier to do that virtually than it is to drive to someone's home. And it works much better on a video link than it does over the telephone. I think people really prefer it because it's almost like you're there, but they haven't got the disruption of someone coming to their home. They have a lot of people visiting their home as foster carers. So in some ways, COVID has really helped us to move that aspect of things forward, because the technology has probably developed much more quickly than it would have done without COVID, and that's been a real positive for our foster carers. They've really enjoyed, and particularly our mainland carers. We have a number of carers on the mainland who are connected carers who we can't see as often as we could if they lived in Newport. So, that is really helpful, that we can see them and see the children as often as we could see them if they were down the road.
Thank you.
If I can just come in on that as well. I think the other thing I would say is that you're right to raise the issue about supported lodgings, Councillor Andre, but I would say that we've got a range of post-16 housing options, much better than we've had historically, actually, and we've worked really closely with our colleagues in housing around this in the last couple of years, and I think actually we're in a much better place than we were even a couple of years ago about ensuring that those young people have got some options before them. So and that includes our care leave as well, so the 18 to 21 bracket. So we're not complacent, but supported lodgings is one part of a broader strategy.
Yeah, it's absolutely not the only option. I think what we're trying to do is strengthen everything, and I think we are doing that.
I have one thing to bring up. I did tell Councillor Brading about this. On Tuesday in the Times, they reported the appeal court judgment in Glasgow, which gave foster carers employment rights, and the unions have already stated that they want this to come down throughout the rest of the country. What worries me on one side of that is cost, and we've talked about pension, and the other side of it, will it encourage foster carers? Steve, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with this case, because we also we had a similar legal challenge in a similar but different legal challenge in Hampshire, which we won. Yes. So the two things I would say, and I remember speaking to my colleague in Glasgow probably about 18 months ago on this case. The first thing is it's Scottish law, and they do things differently up there. So that's number one. The second point, which is more substantive actually, is that when I talked to my colleague in Glasgow, it is not general foster carers that the ruling is about. It is about a very specific scheme that they had, which was like an intensive foster care scheme, which involved aspects of that fostering which were more work-like. And he anticipated that they might lose that case and that they had changed the scheme since then. So it doesn't apply to the ruling does not apply to the generic foster carers that we have. That is not to say that the particular union, which is GMB, might not try to go back into some of those cases. But I have to say the case that they brought up in Hampshire was thrown out of court. So it was didn't have any mileage. So I don't see how they're going to do it. We shall see. If it does become law, I don't think it would in its current state. But looking ahead, that becomes a national problem, not a local problem, because all of the issues that then roll out from that are not manageable as a single local authority. They become national issues around conditions of pay. You'd have to pay sleeping in allowances, you'd have to do all sorts of different things. When I talk to foster carers about this, actually, and maybe it's just the ones I talk to, but I'll be honest, they don't want to become employees. They want to be properly remunerated for the care that they give, but that's not the same as being an employee. And there is a part of the role as a foster carer is about giving love and affection and treating the child as your own family member. That is different to a job, and they're quite clear about that. So we'll see how that runs out. But I'm not, there's lots of things for me to lose sleep about. Just at the moment, that's not one of them.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm glad I raised it because, as I said, the LGA also had raised it in their weekly bulletin or daily bulletin. So that gives a much clearer picture. And I'm sure, Paul, you would agree with me, as you said, other things to lose sleep about. And it would have to become a national problem, as you say. It couldn't become just the local council. Fine. Has anybody else anything else to say on the fostering? No. Unfortunately, Sean Arnold wasn't able to attend our meeting this evening. He does have a few questions across the board, but what we will do is when they come through, we will contact officers by email. I have no idea what he wants to ask or talk about, but we'll worry about that as and when they come through. Thank you, Debbie, for that. I think now we are coming towards the end of it. The work plan is the, excuse me, the next item on the agenda. Yeah. I'm just looking for the work plan at the back of the sheet. Paper E, folks. Are there any comments, or we're talking about now for the 3rd of December, which is at the moment we have Safeguarding Children's Board annual report and also performance and budget.
So I imagine, Chair, that you're going to want another COVID update by that stage.
Yes, I think because by then we'll either be into another spurt or we will be running clear. So yes, I actually would like to add something. I would like home education added to the agenda. I would like to understand whether home education has increased because of COVID or in fact decreased, and also the effects and an update of where home education is on the government's agenda, because I know that Steve Ryan thinks that there are gaps in home education where there isn't enough checks and balances, perhaps. So would you agree that we could add that to the December agenda, please?
Well,
Yes,
it's absolutely fine to add that in. Two things from me. One is the early indications are that, and it is very early, but it hasn't made an awful lot of difference, COVID. That's the early indication. But there's a value in having an update anyway. My second point would be it might sit better, if I might suggest, on the 4th of March, where you've got a school attainment item anyway. Yeah. And it would also give us slightly longer to get more data and get a richer understanding of what's going on. So I think we're still early days, to be honest, on that.
Right, Steve, I agree. We'll add it to the 4th of March. Yeah. And leave it off. Is there anything else in particular that you can think of apart from an update on COVID for December? Or not at this moment? Sorry, Councillor Andre, you wanted to make a comment.
Sorry, Chair, I think I didn't realise. I think you were still referring to Steve. I was going to suggest a couple of other items, but if Steve, had you finished? I do appreciate that I'm actually substituting for Councillor Fuller, but I would respectfully suggest that perhaps maybe for the March next year meeting, that you ask for an update on autism provision, because I know there have been some significant changes in that area, and that would also fit in with school improvement. And under school improvement, I would have thought that SEND would be covered, because I think they're two important areas that but especially autism, I think we're due for an update. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may, I think I'd come in. I would certainly I agree with those, and in particular the SEND item. It would be helpful to bring an update back to the committee about progress since the Ofsted report. That seems entirely proper.
Yep, great. So we will add, at the moment, we will add those to the 4th of March. So it'll be school attainment, added home education, autism, and SEND. Right, that's agreed then. Yep, fine. I think, in fact, then, are there any questions from members, please, before we finish? Nobody, no hands going up. Right. Well, I think we can declare the meeting just about finished. It's just 20 to 7. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. And I must admit, it was really good to hear about the fostering and the adoption. They're good news stories. And thank you very much. And thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.